The rumble of an engine, the smell of oil and grease, that was my world. Aaron Peterson, 38, an auto mechanic in Phoenix. My hands were always dirty, but my life felt pretty clean, pretty straightforward. I loved my work, loved the quiet satisfaction of fixing something broken. I had a small house, a good dog, and a classic '67 Mustang I was slowly restoring, piece by piece, in my garage. It was a simple life, maybe a little predictable, but it was mine, and I was content. I even signed up for night classes at the community college, just to learn a bit about small business management, thinking maybe one day I'd expand my shop. That's where I met Heather. She was in the same class, sitting a few rows ahead, with an earnest look in her eyes as the instructor droned on about quarterly reports. She had this soft, almost ethereal quality about her, a quiet strength I found immediately captivating. Her hair was a warm auburn, usually pulled back in a loose braid, and her smile, when she offered it, was shy but incredibly warm. We started talking after class, first about assignments, then about everything else. She was studying English, she said, hoping to get into a 4-year university. She spoke with a gentle accent I couldn't quite place, and it only added to her allure. I found myself drawn to her vulnerability, to the way she listened intently, making me feel like I was the only person in the room. Our conversations stretched from the parking lot to late-night calls. She was so different from anyone I'd ever met. Thoughtful, artistic, with dreams that felt expansive compared to my grounded reality. I remember one evening, we were sitting on a park bench, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in fiery oranges and purples. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the desert heat. She told me about her family, how much she missed them, how hard she was working to build a life here. I saw a future with her, clear as day. A real future. My simple life, I realized, suddenly felt a little empty without her in it. I wanted to share everything with her, to build something bigger, something beautiful. I was falling, and I was falling hard. She felt like home, a quiet, gentle home I never knew I was missing. Heather confided in me a few weeks later, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes brimming with a vulnerability that tore at my heart. She told me about her immigration status, how precarious it was, how much she worried about her future here. She wasn't an undocumented immigrant, she clarified, but her student visa was expiring, and she had limited options to stay legally. She spoke of the fear of being sent back, of leaving everything she had started to build. It wasn't a plea, not directly, but an honest, painful confession from a woman I was rapidly falling deeply in love with. My heart ached for her. I saw her dreams, her struggles, and all I wanted was to protect her, to make sure she never had to face that kind of uncertainty again. The idea, I admit, came from me. A quiet suggestion, almost a question. What if we got married? My love for her felt so real, so undeniable, and this seemed like a tangible way to secure her future, and by extension, our future. She hesitated, her eyes wide, expressing a mix of gratitude and apprehension. She worried it would be too much for me, that I'd be sacrificing too much. But I brushed her concerns aside. I told her it wasn't a sacrifice, it was a commitment, a step we were taking together. I truly believed it. I believed in us. We talked for hours that night, planning out what our life together would look like. We'd get a bigger apartment, maybe a little place with a yard. She'd continue her studies, find a good job, and we'd build our family. I pictured it all so vividly. So we got married. A small, civil ceremony at the courthouse, with just a couple of friends as witnesses. It wasn't the big wedding I'd once imagined, but it felt incredibly real, incredibly meaningful. I looked into her eyes as we exchanged vows, and I saw a lifetime of happiness. I saw the promise of a shared future, of genuine love. I poured my savings into our life, upgrading our apartment, furnishing it with pieces we picked out together, making it feel like a real home. I worked extra shifts, sending money to her family back home when she asked, just to ease her mind. I supported her while she looked for work, telling her there was no rush, that she should focus on her studies and getting settled. I was the rock, the provider, the loving husband. I felt a deep sense of purpose, a pride in building this life with her. Every sacrifice felt like an investment in our shared happiness, in the future we were so meticulously planning. There was no doubt in my mind. This was real. This was love. and we were in it together. The initial days after our wedding, and as her green card application progressed, were a blur of shared dreams and quiet intimacy. We spent evenings cooking together, me trying to decipher her family recipes, her laughing at my attempts. We'd talk about everything, from the mundane details of our day to the grand plans for our future. I'd show her the progress on my Mustang, explaining the mechanics, and she'd listen with genuine interest, or so it seemed. I felt like the luckiest man alive, believing I had found my soulmate, a gentle, intelligent woman who understood me. Then came the waiting, the long, drawn-out process of immigration interviews and paperwork. It was stressful, certainly, but we faced it together. I was always there, holding her hand, reassuring her. When the letter finally arrived, confirming her permanent residency status, it felt like a collective sigh of relief. We celebrated a quiet dinner at home, toasting to her new beginning, to our secure future. I remember looking at her across the table, her face illuminated by candlelight, and feeling an overwhelming sense of accomplishment and love. We had done it. We had overcome the hurdle. But almost immediately after that, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic change, more like a slow, insidious creep. At first, I attributed it to the stress of the process finally lifting. Maybe she was just relaxing, settling into her new security. But the subtle changes began to accumulate. Her quiet laughter became less frequent. Her touch grew less tender, less spontaneous. She started spending more time on her phone, often walking into another room to take calls. When I asked about it, she'd offer vague explanations, just catching up with friends or looking for job leads. The warmth that had enveloped our home began to dissipate, replaced by a growing chill. She became distant, emotionally unavailable. Our conversations grew shorter, punctuated by silences that felt heavy and suffocating. She started making demands, small at first, then larger. She wanted a new car, a better wardrobe, more expensive outings. My mechanic's salary, which had always been enough for my simple life, and even for our shared apartment and her support, suddenly felt inadequate. When I tried to talk about it, to understand what was happening, she'd grow cold, her eyes hardening. She'd accuse me of not understanding her needs, of being insensitive. It felt like walking on eggshells in my own home, constantly trying to appease a woman who seemed increasingly unhappy, increasingly remote. The sweet, vulnerable Heather I had fallen in love with was slowly, terrifyingly, disappearing, replaced by a stranger I barely recognized. The hope I had built our life on began to curdle into a gnawing, persistent doubt. The last few weeks before it all came crashing down were a blur of quiet desperation. I tried everything to bridge the growing chasm between us. I bought flowers, cooked her favorite meals, even booked a weekend getaway to Sedona, hoping to rekindle the spark, to find the Heather I knew and loved. But it was like trying to warm a stone. She accepted my gestures with polite detachment, her eyes vacant, her responses clipped. The demands continued, escalating to a point where my bank account was constantly strained and my stress levels were through the roof. I found myself making excuses for her behavior to my friends, to myself. She's stressed. She's finding her footing. She'll come around. But deep down, a cold dread had begun to settle in my gut. Then came that morning. I woke up, the first rays of sun filtering through the blinds, painting stripes across our empty bed. Empty. My hand reached out, expecting to find her there, but only met cool sheets. A jolt of unease shot through me. This wasn't like her. She was usually up before me, making coffee. I called her name, first softly, then louder. Silence. A terrifying, absolute silence. I walked through the apartment, my heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Her side of the closet was bare. Her toiletries were gone from the bathroom. The decorative box where we kept our spare keys was open, empty. Panic seized me, cold and suffocating. I rushed to the garage, my mind racing through 1,000 impossible scenarios. The garage door was slightly ajar. My '67 Mustang, the car I had spent years restoring, piece by painstaking piece, a symbol of my hard work and my dreams, was gone. The space where it usually sat was a gaping, empty void. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling as I tried to log into our joint bank account. The screen flickered to life, displaying a number that made my stomach drop into my shoes. Almost nothing left. Our shared savings, The money I had poured into her future, drained. I collapsed onto the cold concrete floor of the garage, the smell of old oil and gasoline suddenly sickening. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the enormity of what was happening. It couldn't be. Not Heather. Not the woman I loved. The woman I had married. The woman I had trusted with Everett. Ping. The world tilted on its axis. The phone rang, startling me. It was a lawyer's office. They informed me, in a chillingly detached tone, that they represented Heather and that divorce papers would be arriving shortly, citing irreconcilable differences. The words hit me like a physical blow, stripping away any last vestiges of hope, leaving me completely hollowed out, shattered into a million pieces. The silence of the empty garage echoed the vast, desolate emptiness that had suddenly opened up inside me. I was adrift, drowning in a sea of betrayal and disbelief. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. I moved through them like a ghost, the world around me muffled and distant. The divorce papers arrived, a thick envelope filled with legal jargon that only confirmed the brutal reality. Irreconcilable differences. That clinical phrase felt like a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the gaping wound in my heart. My friends and family rallied around me, offering comfort, but their words felt hollow against the overwhelming sense of shame and stupidity that consumed me. How could I have been so blind? So utterly, completely fooled? I tried to make sense of it, to piece together the fragments of our life, but it was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The financial ruin was immediate and crushing. The debt piled up, a constant, suffocating reminder of everything I had lost. My shop, once a source of pride, now felt tainted. I couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate. Every creak of the door, every phone call, made me jump, half expecting her to walk back in, to explain it all away, to tell me it was a terrible misunderstanding. But she never did. One evening, staring at the empty space where my Mustang used to sit, a cold fury began to replace the crushing despair. It wasn't just about the money, or the car, or even the shattered trust. It was about needing to understand, needing to know why. I needed answers, not just for my own sanity, but for a sense of justice, however small. I couldn't just let her disappear, leaving me with nothing but questions and a destroyed life. I decided to hire a private investigator. It was another significant expense I could barely afford, but it felt like the only way forward. A grizzled, quiet man named Frank, with weary eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I laid out the whole story, my voice hoarse with humiliation. He listened patiently, taking notes, his expression unreadable. The truth, when Frank started to uncover it, was far more calculated and sinister than I could have ever imagined. Each phone call, each piece of evidence he presented, felt like another stab to the heart. Heather hadn't just left, she had executed a meticulously planned scheme. He found her, living in a different part of the state, not alone, but with another man. A man she had apparently been involved with for months, possibly even before she met me. The phone calls she'd taken in other rooms, the vague job searches, the sudden demands, they were all part of an elaborate charade. She had used me, purely as a means to gain legal status. The love, the vulnerability, the shared dreams, all a performance. She had systematically drained our joint accounts, not just taking her half, but a significant portion of my savings, money I had worked for years to accumulate. The Mustang, my beloved classic, had been sold, likely for quick cash, a final insult, a final severing of any ties. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just a husband. I was a pawn in her elaborate immigration fraud. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it left me breathless. My world didn't just tilt, it imploded. The rage was a cold, unfamiliar fire in my belly. It wasn't the explosive kind, but a deep, burning inferno fueled by betrayal and the utter injustice of it all. Knowing the truth, as agonizing as it was, also brought a strange clarity. I wasn't just a heartbroken fool. I was a victim of a crime, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Frank, the PI, connected me with a lawyer specializing in immigration fraud cases. The initial consultation was sobering. He warned me it would be an arduous, emotionally exhausting, and financially draining battle. Proving immigration fraud, especially after a marriage, was incredibly difficult. But I didn't care. I needed to fight. I needed justice, not just for myself, but for the fundamental principle of truth. The legal process was a relentless grind. Endless paperwork, court dates, cross-examinations that felt like open-heart surgery. Every detail of my relationship with Heather was laid bare, scrutinized, questioned. Her lawyer painted me as a bitter, vengeful ex-husband, making wild accusations. There were moments, many of them, when I wanted to give up. The debt continued to mount, crushing me under its weight. My business suffered. My sleep was haunted by replays of her sweet lies, her manipulative smiles. But then I'd think of the empty garage, the drained bank account, the cold, calculated way she had used my trust and my love, and a fresh wave of determination would surge through me. I owed it to myself. Slowly, painstakingly, we built our case. Frank's evidence, combined with financial records and expert testimony, painted a damning picture. The judge listened, the jury observed, and finally, after months that felt like years, the verdict came down. My lawyer called, his voice calm, steady. We had won. Heather's green card was revoked. The court found her guilty of immigration fraud and granted a judgment against her for the stolen funds and the value of my car. I remember the exact moment I heard the news. I was standing in my garage, staring at the empty space. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, followed by a profound, bittersweet sense of liberation. It wasn't a triumphant roar, more like a quiet exhale. I wouldn't fully recover my money, the lawyer explained. She had likely moved it, hidden it, or simply spent it. But the act of justice, the official recognition of her deceit, provided a closure I hadn't realized I desperately needed. It was an acknowledgement that what she did was wrong, fundamentally and legally wrong. It didn't erase the pain, didn't bring back the Mustang, or the years of trust one had invested, but it lifted a monumental weight from my shoulders. The fight had been worth it. I had stood up for myself, and I had prevailed. The victory in court was a turning point, but it wasn't a magic wand that erased the damage. I was still left with crippling debt, a shattered heart, and the daunting task of rebuilding my life from scratch. The shop barely limped along, and the house felt too big, too empty. For months, I just existed, going through the motions, the betrayal a constant, dull ache in my chest. One afternoon, a flyer caught my eye at the local diner. Volunteers needed, Phoenix Community Shelter. Something in me stirred. I had nothing else to do, nowhere else to put my energy. Maybe helping others, even in a small way, would distract me from my own wreckage. I started by washing dishes, then helping serve meals, eventually fixing broken appliances around the shelter. It was hard work, sometimes heartbreaking, but it was honest. And for the first time in a long time, I felt useful again, connected to something real. The people at the shelter, both the staff and the residents, were from all walks of life, each with their own story of struggle and resilience. There was a quiet camaraderie there, a shared understanding of what it meant to be down but not out. I found myself listening to their stories, offering a hand, a kind word, and in doing so, I started to heal. I learned that true strength wasn't about avoiding pain, but about navigating it, about finding purpose even when everything else felt lost. I started saving again, slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding my financial stability. The Mustang was gone, but I found a beat-up old pickup truck that needed a lot of love, and working on it in my garage brought back a familiar, comforting rhythm. I heard snippets about Heather through the grapevine, mainly from my lawyer. Stripped of her legal status, facing deportation, her manipulative tactics had left her with nothing but isolation. The other man had disappeared, her scheme unraveled, leaving her alone to face the consequences. I felt no triumph, no desire for revenge, just a quiet understanding that her choices had led her down a path of emptiness. As for me, I found a new sense of community at the shelter, genuine connections forged in shared humanity, not in deceit. I learned to trust again, cautiously, but openly. My life wasn't the one I had planned with Heather, but it was a life built on genuine connection, on service, on resilience. I wasn't the same trusting, naive man who had fallen for her elaborate trap. I was wiser, stronger, and in a profound way, more whole. The scars remained, a permanent reminder of the past, but they no longer defined me. They were just part of my story, a testament to what I had overcome. And in the quiet moments, working on my truck or sharing a laugh with a fellow volunteer, I knew I was truly free, finally building a life that was authentically, genuinely mine.